Ladies and gentlemen, on this episode of Lost in Time, we're going to take a look at some of the long-lost fighting games from the 90s that you may have forgotten about. Back then, if you were to walk into an arcade, you would see one of two things: a giant crowd around Street Fighter 2, or a giant crowd around either Mortal Kombat or Mortal Kombat 2. These were the granddaddies of punching and kicking in pixels, and they paved the way for many, many titles. Some of them were great, some of them not so much. Let's take a look. What happens when you take clunky controls, fatalities, and add some prehistorics to it? Primal Rage. Primal Rage is just one of many games that kind of ripped off Mortal Kombat 2 with its violence and gore and fatalities and whatnot back in the 90s. This puppy dropped onto the scene in arcades in 1994, published by Atari Games. The game is pure cheese. Beautiful, bloody, dino-rific cheese. The game takes place in a post-apocalyptic Earth, but not the Earth that you know. We're talking Earth with a U. Like most games in the arcade, about a year later, on August 25th of 1995, this game hit home consoles on the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and a bunch of the handhelds. And boy, was it a blast for us. The game doesn't hold up well today, but back then it was actually really cool, and we all had a lot of fun playing it. And a fun fact that not a lot of people know, but Primal Rage 2 was in development from Atari Games that was supposed to launch in September of 1996. The game was ultimately canceled, but was supposed to feature human fighters called avatars. Now, a playable version of the game does exist and can be found at the Galloping Ghost Arcade in Chicago. You see this chump burning alive? You noticing a trend? Fatalities. Thanks to Mortal Kombat, every game had to have them, and we didn't hate that because we loved them. Next on our list is a little gem called Eternal Champions. Eternal Champions was released in 1993 from Sega Interactive exclusively for the Sega Genesis. The game kind of came and went for a lot of fans. I remember we sat around the TV playing this for hours on end because I was the only one of my friends that had a Sega Genesis, and this is what we did. The game's fatality system, which were called overkills, were hands down some of the most difficult things I can remember ever doing back in the 90s. A quick fun fact about Eternal Champions was it was one of the very few games that actually worked with the Sega Activator, which was their gimmicky peripheral that allowed you to control the game with your body. If you guys think some of your characters in the games you play now are OP, check this out. If you were playing with the Activator back in the 90s, you could inflict 50% more damage and take 50% less damage. Talk about some serious character buffs. Oh, time killers. This is one of the couple fighting games in the 90s that got away. I never got to play this one, but from the sounds of the people that did and the magazines that reviewed it, it was a steaming pile of shit. This game was released in November of 1992 by developer Incredible Technologies. Now, part of the reason I never got a chance to play it is because it was only released in the arcades, and none of my local arcades carried it. It was scheduled to be ported over to the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and the Mega Drive in 1994. It was canceled outright by Nintendo, but it was completed for the Sega, but never released. Mortal Kombat had left me bloodthirsty for more violent video games, and I remember seeing this game in GamePro magazine and thinking this was going to be the next big thing. Oh, how I was wrong. What it was to be a boy. The final title that we're going to talk about is something that is near and dear to my heart. This game is not only one of the lost, forgotten titles of the 90s, but it is also one of my favorite games of all time. Feast your sweaty little nerd eyes on Bushido Blade. Bushido Blade was published by Squaresoft and came out in March of 1997 in Japan and was finally ported over into America in September of 1997. This game was so different. It was completely realistic for the time. This was a game where your attacks actually mattered. One slice from the sword could kill you because there was no life bars. This was the quintessential Akira Kurosawa inspired game. Feudal Japan's, samurais, swordsmen, tension, awesome swordplay, free roaming environments, no time limits, and instant kills, all combined into an awesome Japanese setting made everything that I wanted into a game. This game was just pure hype, and a sequel came out a year later, and that was pretty hype too, and well received by fans and critics alike. And then the series just kind of went dormant, never to be seen again. If you listen carefully at night, you can almost faintly hear the cries of Adam Ronin in the sky, begging to whatever deity is in charge of gaming to release a reboot of Bushido Blade on Xbox One and PlayStation 4. And I'll leave you with that for a little while. That concludes our episode of Lost in Time, covering some of the best and some of the worst fighting games for the 1990s. But what ones were your favorites? Do you have any that didn't make the list? Let us know, and maybe we can squeeze it into a follow-up episode. As always, like and subscribe, check us out on Patreon, and overall, just be a part of the Ronin family. We appreciate you.